She was pregnant and desperate when she took a job as a nanny in a single millionaire's mansion. But what started as work turned into love. The shrill sound of the ambulance siren cut through the Manhattan night air, but Lila Carson barely noticed it. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the positive pregnancy test in her hands, sitting on the cold floor of her apartment's tiny bathroom. Tears streamed silently down her face, staining the crumpled shirt of the waitress uniform she still wore. "This can't be happening," Lila muttered to herself, her voice breaking. At 24, her life was complicated enough. A recent graduate, sunk in student debt, working 2 low-paid jobs to survive in one of the most expensive cities in the world. And now, pregnant. The father, a guy she barely knew, the result of an impulsive night out after a particularly stressful shift at the restaurant. He disappeared the next morning, leaving only a note with a phone number, which, she soon discovered, was a fake. Lila closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to contain the panic that threatened to engulf her. She needed a plan, and fast. Her double shifts barely covered the rent and bills. How could she support a baby? The idea of returning to her small town in rural Ohio, admitting failure to her conservative parents, was unthinkable. Getting up with difficulty, Lila walked to the small living room that also served as her bedroom, turning on her battered laptop. Perhaps there was a better job vacancy, something that could save her from this desperate situation. Her eyes scrolled through dozens of hopeless advertisements until one in particular caught her eye. Wanted, full-time babysitter for newborn, accommodation and meals included, competitive salary, Upper East Side. Lila's heart raced. It was too perfect to be true, a job that would solve her housing and income problems in one fell swoop. Her hands were still shaking when she clicked to see more details. The position was to start immediately, looking after the newborn son of a widowed businessman. The requirements seemed strict, but nothing Lila couldn't handle. She had babysitting experience during college and loved children. Without thinking twice, Lila filled in the application form, hastily attaching her updated CV. Only then did reality hit her. How could she explain her own pregnancy? Surely no one would hire a pregnant nanny to look after a newborn. Biting her lip, Lila hesitated for a moment before deciding to omit this information. If she got the job, she would find a way to deal with it later. The important thing now was to make sure she had a roof over her head and food on the table. Exhausted physically and emotionally, Lila barely slept that night. Her mind was buzzing with possibilities and fears about the future. The next morning, she nearly dropped her cell phone in fright when it rang, displaying an unknown number. "Hello," she answered, her voice hoarse with sleep. "Miss Carson, this is Amelia, assistant to Mr. Alexander Nash. We've received your application for the nanny position and would like to arrange an interview today, if possible." Lila held her breath, hardly believing what she was hearing. "Of course, yes, I'm available at any time," she replied, trying to sound professional despite her nervousness. "Good. Mr. Nash will see you at 2 p.m. at his residence. I'll send you the address by message. Please be on time." The call ended abruptly, leaving Lila dazed. She only had a few hours to prepare for what could be the most important interview of her life. With trembling hands, Lila rummaged through her closet in search of something appropriate to wear. She opted for a simple but elegant dress that disguised her still imperceptible belly. She put on a little makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes from a bad night's sleep and tied her brown hair up in a discreet bun. When she arrived at the address, Lila was stunned. The residence was actually an imposing 3-story mansion with an exposed brick facade and huge windows. Meticulously tended gardens flanked the entrance, where a security guard awaited her. "Miss Carson?" he asked, consulting a tablet. Upon confirming her identity, the man led her down a stone path to the imposing front door. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive. Lila was guided through an entrance hall with marble floors and a curved staircase leading to the upper floors. Works of art that seemed to be worth more than everything she owned adorned the walls. "This way, please." A stern-looking, middle-aged woman greeted her, leading her into a large living room. "Mr. Nash will be here in a moment. Can I get you something to drink?" Lila politely declined, fearing that her hand was shaking too much to hold a glass. She sat rigidly on the leather sofa, trying to calm her racing heart. Minutes later, firm footsteps echoed down the corridor. Lila stood up instinctively as a tall, athletic-looking man entered the room. Alexander Nash looked about 40, with dark hair that was slightly graying at the temples and intense blue eyes that seemed to pierce her soul. "Miss Carson, I presume?" He extended his hand in greeting, his voice deep and authoritative. "Yes, sir. Lila Carson." "Thank you very much for the opportunity," she replied, hoping that her handshake didn't give away her nervousness. Nash watched her for a few moments before gesturing for them to sit down. "So, Ms. Carson, tell me why you believe you're the right person to look after my son." Lila took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. This could be the moment that changed the course of her life and the life of the child she was carrying. She wouldn't waste this chance. Lila adjusted herself on the sofa, keeping her posture upright as she stared into Alexander Nash's piercing eyes. The silence in the room was palpable, broken only by the soft ticking of an antique clock in the corner. "Mr. Nash," she began, her voice firmer than she had expected, "I believe I am the right person to look after your son because I understand the importance of this role. It's not just about meeting a child's basic needs, but nurturing their development in every aspect." She paused, noticing a slight arch of Nash's eyebrow. Encouraged, Lila continued, "During my babysitting experience at college, I learned that every child is unique. My approach has always been personalized, focusing not only on physical care, but also on emotional and cognitive development." Nash leaned forward slightly, his interest apparently piqued. "And how would you apply this personalized approach to my son?" Lila felt a twinge of guilt as she remembered her own undisclosed pregnancy, but pushed the thought aside. "Well, first of all, I would carefully observe your child's patterns and preferences. Some babies, for example, are calmed by soft music, while others prefer silence. I would adjust my care routine according to these observations." She paused, gathering her courage for her next statement. "Also, Mr. Nash, I know that the loss of the baby's mother must have been devastating. Although I can never replace her, I promise to create a loving and stable environment for your child." For a moment, something akin to vulnerability crossed Nash's face, quickly replaced by his usual neutral expression. He stood up abruptly, walking over to the window that overlooked the meticulously tended gardens. "My wife, Claire," he said, his back to Lila, "died during childbirth. Unforeseeable complications," the doctor said. His voice, normally controlled, trembled slightly. "Harrison is only 3 weeks old." Lila felt her heart squeeze. The pain in his voice was palpable, mixed with something that sounded like guilt. She fought the urge to get up and comfort him, remaining professional. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Nash," she said softly. "I can't imagine how difficult that must be." Nash turned, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, Lila glimpsed the man behind the facade of successful businessman, a grieving father, trying to navigate solo parenthood. "Harrison is all I have left of her," he said, his voice low. "I need someone who understands that, who can look after him with the love she would have." Lila felt tears forming in her eyes, but held them back. "I understand, Mr. Nash, and I promise that if you give me the chance, I will look after Harrison as if he were my own son." The words came out before she could think, and Lila immediately wondered if she had gone too far, but Nash only nodded slowly, returning to his seat. "Tell me about your family, Miss Carson," he asked, abruptly changing the subject. "Do your parents approve of you moving to New York?" Lila hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "My parents, they have very traditional views on how life should be. We don't always agree, Carl, but I respect their beliefs. I came to New York in search of new opportunities, a chance to grow." Nash watched her intently, as if he could read between the lines of her careful response. "And now, what are your plans for the future?" The question hit Lila like a punch in the gut. Her future, which only 2 days ago had seemed so uncertain, now hung by a thread in this interview. She took a deep breath, deciding to be as honest as possible without revealing her pregnancy. "To be honest, Mr. Nash, my plans have changed recently. I realized that I want something more meaningful than just surviving in this city. I want to make a difference in someone's life. That's why this opportunity means so much to me." Nash nodded slowly, a slight smile forming on his lips. "Well said, Ms. Carson." He stood up, holding out his hand. "I think I've seen enough. Amelia will be in touch later today with more details." Leela stood up, shaking his hand with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Nash. Regardless of the outcome, I really appreciate your time." As she was led back out of the mansion, Leela struggled to process everything that had happened. The interview had been intense, emotional in a way she hadn't expected. And now the wait for the result would be agonizing. Back on the busy streets of Manhattan, Leela walked aimlessly, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The story of Nash and his newborn son had touched her deeply. What would it be like for that baby to grow up without his mother? And what would it be like for her to look after one child while carrying another in her womb? Hours passed, and Leela had already walked a good part of Central Park when her phone rang. The unknown number made her heart leap. "Hello?" she answered, her voice trembling. "Miss Carson, this is Amelia again. Mr. Nash would like to know if you could start tomorrow." Leela stopped walking, almost dropping the phone in shock. Tomorrow? You mean I got the job?" "Yes, Mr. Nash was very impressed. He'd like you to move into the mansion as soon as possible. Is there a problem?" No problem at all," Leela replied quickly, her mind racing to process the information. "I can start tomorrow. Yes." After receiving further instructions from Amelia, Leela hung up the phone, taking a seat on a nearby bench. She had made it. A job, a place to live, a chance to start again, but the guilt of not having revealed her pregnancy weighed heavily on her chest. As the sun set over New York's skyscraper skyline, Leela made a silent promise to herself, to the baby she was carrying, and to little Harrison. She would do whatever it took to protect and care for them, no matter what the cost. With renewed determination, Leela stood up, ready to face whatever fate had in store for her. Tomorrow would be the start of a new life, for all of them. The sun had barely risen when Leela arrived at the Nash mansion, dragging a battered suitcase containing her few belongings. Amelia, Alexander's assistant, greeted her with a brusque nod, guiding her quickly through the silent corridors of the house. "Mr. Nash had to leave for an emergency meeting," Amelia informed her, her voice low and efficient. "He apologized for not being here to see you in person." Leela nodded, secretly relieved to have a moment to adjust without the intimidating presence of her new employer. Amelia led her to a room on the second floor, adjacent to the nursery. "This will be your room," Amelia said, opening the door. "There's a private bathroom and a walk-in closet. Feel free to settle in, but don't be long. Little Harrison will need to be fed soon." As soon as Amelia left, Leela let out a sigh she didn't even know she was holding in. The room was larger than her old apartment, decorated in soft shades of blue and grey. A king-size bed dominated the space, flanked by large windows overlooking the gardens. She quickly unpacked her suitcase, storing her simple clothes in the spacious closet. As she passed the full-length mirror, Leela paused, examining her reflection. There were still no visible signs of her pregnancy, but she knew it was only a matter of time. "Let's make this work," she muttered to herself, smoothing out the nanny's uniform that Amelia had provided. A soft cry from the next room brought her out of her thoughts. Taking a deep breath, Leela headed for the nursery, ready to meet her new protégé. The nursery was a spacious and welcoming room, decorated in pastel colors. A delicate mobile rotated over a light wooden cradle, from where the increasingly insistent crying came. Leela approached, her heart melting at the sight of little Harrison. Only 3 weeks old, he was tiny and perfect, with a fluff of dark hair and blue eyes that resembled his father's. "Hello, little one," she said. "Hello, little one," Leela whispered, picking him up gently. "I'm Leela. I'm going to look after you now." As she fed Harrison with the bottle prepared by the housekeeper, Lila felt an immediate connection with the baby. Perhaps it was her own condition, or simply the tragic story behind his birth. But she knew she would do anything to protect this child. The hours passed quickly as Lila familiarized herself with Harrison's routine and the house's procedures. It wasn't until late afternoon, when she was changing the baby after a nap, that she heard Alexander Nash's deep voice. "How is he?" Lila turned around, surprised. Nash was standing in the nursery doorway, still dressed in an impeccable suit, although his tie was loose and his hair slightly disheveled. "He's fine, Mr. Nash," Lila replied, finishing buttoning Harrison's overalls. "He ate well, slept at the right times. He's a very quiet baby." Nash approached, his eyes fixed on his son. There was a mixture of love and pain in his gaze that made Lila's heart squeeze. Can I hold him?" Nash asked, his normally confident voice now hesitant. "Of course," Lila replied softly, passing Harrison into his father's arms. Nash held his son carefully, as if afraid of breaking him. For a moment, father and son looked at each other, and Lila saw tears forming in the businessman's eyes. "He has her eyes," Nash murmured, more to himself than to Lila. "Mr. Nash," Lila began cautiously, "I know it's none of my business, but maybe it would be good for Harrison to have some photos of his mother in his room, so he can get to know her somehow." Nash looked at her, surprised, as if he had forgotten she was there. For a moment, Lila feared she had crossed some invisible boundary, but then, to her surprise, Nash nodded slowly. "You're right, Miss Carson. Claire. She'd like that." He carefully returned Harrison to his crib. "I'll arrange for some photos tomorrow." There was a moment of uncomfortable silence before Nash spoke again. "How was your first day?" "Very well, thank you," Lila replied. "Harrison is a lovely baby, and everyone in the house has been very helpful." Nash nodded, looking pleased. "Good. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Harrison's well-being is my absolute priority." As he turned to leave, Lila gathered her courage. "Mr. Nash, can I ask you a question?" He stopped, turning to face her. "Of course. Why did you choose me?" "I'm sure there were more experienced candidates." Nash watched her for a moment before answering. "Honesty, Mrs. Carson, I saw something in your eyes that reminded me of Claire. A determination, an inner strength. I believe that's exactly what Harrison needs." With those words, he left, leaving Lila stunned. She looked at Harrison, who was now sleeping peacefully, and felt the weight of her responsibility more than ever. That night, lying in her new luxurious bed, Lila couldn't sleep. Her hand rested on her still flat belly, tumultuous thoughts about the future keeping her awake. How could she go on hiding her pregnancy? What would happen when she could no longer hide it? And most importantly, how could she look after Harrison and her own baby at the same time? A soft cry from the nursery brought her out of her thoughts. Getting up quickly, Lila went over to Harrison, taking him gently in her arms. "Shh, it's all right, little one," she whispered, rocking him gently. "I'm here. I'll always be here for you." As she soothed Harrison, Lila made a silent promise. No matter what happened, she would find a way to make it work. For Harrison, for her baby, and for herself. The baby calmed down in her arms and went back to sleep. Lila put him back in his crib carefully, watching his serene little face for a moment. "It's just us now, Harrison," she murmured, "but we'll be fine. I promise." With one last look at the sleeping baby, Lila returned to her room, determined to face whatever the future held. The next day would bring new challenges, but she would be ready. She had to be. The weeks turned into months, and Lila found herself immersed in a routine that, although exhausting, brought a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. The days began early, with the first rays of sunlight barely touching the windows of the mansion when she was already on her feet, preparing for another day of caring for Harrison. The little one grew by leaps and bounds, his toothless smile brightening even the darkest of days. Lila often found herself watching him, amazed at each new development. The first laugh, the first rollover, the first attempts to sit up on his own. But as Harrison blossomed, Lila faced her own silent battle. Her pregnancy, now entering its 4th month, was becoming harder to hide every day. The baggy uniforms and excuses of weight gain due to stress wouldn't last much longer. One particularly hectic afternoon, while trying to calm a fussy Harrison with the birth of his first teeth, Lila felt suddenly dizzy. Holding onto the edge of the crib, she took a deep breath, trying to pull herself together. "Miss Carson, is everything all right?" Alexander Nash's voice startled her. He was standing in the nursery doorway, a worried expression on his usually impassive face. "I'm fine, Mr. Nash," Lila replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a bit tired. Harrison's got his first teeth coming in and it's been hard on him." Nash approached, taking Harrison from Lila's arms. To his surprise, the baby calmed down almost instantly in his father's arms. "You've been doing an exceptional job, Miss Carson," Nash said, his voice softer than usual. "But you mustn't neglect your own health. Perhaps it's time to consider hiring an assistant for you." Lila felt her heart racing. An assistant would mean more watchful eyes, more chances of her condition being discovered. "That's not necessary, Mr. Nash. I can handle it." Nash watched her for a moment, his piercing blue eyes as if they could see right through her. "Lila," he said, using her first name for the first time, "is there something you want to tell me?" The moment that Lila had both feared and longed for had arrived. She felt her legs weaken and sat down on the breastfeeding chair, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I'm pregnant," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Nash stood motionless, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. Harrison, oblivious to the tension in the air, played contentedly with his father's tie. "How long?" Nash finally asked, his voice controlled. "Almost 4 months," Lila replied, and unable to look directly at him. "I was already pregnant when I came for the interview. I know I should have told you before, but I was desperate and scared, and then I got so attached to Harrison. I'm so sorry." Nash walked over to the window, still holding Harrison, his gaze lost in the gardens outside. Lila felt her heart sink. This was the end. She would be fired. She would lose everything she had built up over the last few months. "Dad," Nash began hesitantly. "Is he involved?" Lila shook her head. "No, he doesn't know, and even if he did, I doubt he'd care." Nash turned to face her, his expression a complex mixture of emotions that Lila couldn't decipher. "Were you planning to tell me?" "Yes," Lila replied, finding the courage to look him straight in the eye. "I was going to tell you. I was just waiting for the right moment." Nash nodded slowly, as if processing the information. Then, to Lila's complete surprise, a small smile formed on his lips. "Well, it looks like Harrison will have a playmate sooner than I expected." Lila blinked, confused. What does that mean?" Nash approached, taking a seat in the armchair next to her. Harrison nestled in his lap. "It means, Ms. Carson, that your job is not at risk. In fact, I think this could be an opportunity for all of us." "I don't understand," Lila said, still stunned. "Harrison lost his mother before he even met her," Nash explained, his voice heavy with emotion. "And although I try, I know there are things that a father alone can't provide. Seeing you with him, the connection you have, it's something special, something I don't want to take away from him." Lila felt the tears running freely down her face now, a mixture of relief and gratitude flooding her. "So, if you're willing," Nash continued, "I'd like to propose a new arrangement. Continue being Harrison's nanny, but also allow this house to be a home for you and your baby. We can adapt your hours, hire additional help when necessary. What do you say?" Lila could hardly believe what she was hearing. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for or ask for. I don't know what to say. This is incredible. Thank you, Mr. Nash. Thank you so much." Nash smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his eyes in a way Lila had never seen before. "Alexander," he said softly. "I guess after all this, you can call me Alexander." At that moment, with Harrison gurgling happily between them, Lila felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The future, which had once seemed so uncertain and frightening, now shone with possibilities. "Welcome to the family, Lila," Alexander said, holding out Harrison to her. As she held the baby, feeling the movements of her own child in her womb, Lila knew that, somehow, everything would be all right. This house, these people, had become more than a job or a temporary refuge. They had become her home. The following months brought subtle but significant changes to the Nash mansion. Lila's room was renovated to accommodate a crib and changing area, transforming it into a welcoming space for the baby's arrival. Alexander, true to his word, hired an assistant to help Lila with the daily chores, allowing her to rest more and prepare for the birth. One sunny fall afternoon, Lila was sitting in the garden, watching Harrison play with fallen leaves. Her belly, now prominent at 7 months of gestation, was a constant reminder of the life growing inside her. "He looks happy," Alexander's voice surprised her. He approached, taking a seat on the bench next to her. Lila smiled, watching Harrison laugh as he threw leaves into the air. "He's a wonderful child, so full of joy, despite everything." Alexander nodded, a mixture of pride and melancholy in his eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough. Whether Claire would approve of the way I'm raising our son." Lila hesitated for a moment before gently placing her hand on Alexander's. "I'm sure she'd be proud. Harrison is loved, happy and healthy. What more could a mother want for her son?" Alexander looked down at their joined hands, a small smile forming on his lips. "Thank you, Lila. Your words mean more than you know." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by Harrison's laughter. Lila felt a stirring in her belly and instinctively put her hand to her stomach. "Is everything all right?" Alexander asked, concern evident in his voice. Lila smiled, taking Alexander's hand and placing it on her stomach. "Feel it. She's kicking." Alexander's eyes widened as he felt the baby's movements. "She? It's a girl." Lila nodded, her expression softening. "Yes. I found out at the last ultrasound. I wanted to keep it a surprise, but, well, I think you deserve to know." "A girl," Alexander murmured, his hand still resting on Lila's belly. "That's wonderful." Just then, Harrison ran up to them, his little arms full of colorful leaves. "Papa, Livia, look!" Alexander picked up his son, laughing as Harrison dumped the leaves on them. "I see someone's enjoying the fall." Lila watched the scene, her heart overflowing with affection. This makeshift family, formed by the most unexpected circumstances, had become her world. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparations. The baby's room was decorated in soft shades of lilac and green, with a mural of an enchanted forest painted on one of the walls. Alexander insisted that nothing be spared to ensure the comfort of Lila and their daughter. One evening, while Lila was organizing the baby's freshly washed clothes, a strong contraction made her gasp. She looked at the clock. There were still 2 weeks to go until the due date. "Calm down, little one," Lila murmured, stroking her belly. "It's not time yet." But the contractions continued, increasing in intensity and frequency. Her heart racing, Lila called for help. Alexander appeared within seconds, pale with worry. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" Lila nodded, breathing heavily. "I think she's decided she wants to see the world a bit sooner." Everything happened quickly after that. The rush to the hospital, the hours of labor, the growing anticipation. Alexander stayed by Lila's side the whole time, holding her hand, offering words of encouragement. In the early hours of the morning, a baby's cry echoed through the delivery room. "It's a beautiful, healthy baby girl," announced the doctor, placing the tiny bundle in the arms of an exhausted but overjoyed Lila. Alexander, with tears in his eyes, leaned over to see the baby. "She's perfect, Lila, just perfect." Lila looked at her daughter, marveling at every detail of her little face. "Welcome to the world, Lily," she whispered, the name chosen months before finally coming to life. In the days that followed, the Nash mansion was filled with an atmosphere of silent celebration. Harrison, fascinated by his baby sister, as he called her, spent hours watching Lily in her crib. One afternoon, while Lila was breastfeeding Lily in the living room, Alexander walked in carrying a folder of documents. "Lila," he began, his voice serious, "there's something I'd like to discuss with you." She looked at him, curious. "What is it, Alexander?" He sat down next to her, opening the folder. "These are legal documents. I'd like to make your position here official, not just as Harrison's nanny, but as his legal guardian should anything happen to me." Lila was speechless, looking at the papers and then at Alexander. I don't know what to say. This is a huge responsibility." Alexander took her free hand, his eyes intense. "You're already part of this family, Lila. Harrison adores you, and I can't imagine our life without you and Lily now." Tears began to form in Lila's eyes. "Alexander, I'm honored, truly honored." As she signed the documents, Lila felt as if she was turning over a new leaf in her life. From a pregnant and desperate young woman, she had been transformed into a confident mother and an integral part of a loving family. That night, with Lily asleep in her arms and Harrison snuggled up next to her for his bedtime story, Lila looked up at Alexander, who was watching them from the doorway with a gentle smile. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing that he would understand everything she meant with that single word. Alexander entered the room, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. "No, Lila, I'm the one who thanks you for bringing light back into our lives." And there, in that cozy room, surrounded by love and acceptance, Lila knew that she had finally found her place in the world. The months turned into years, and life in the Nash mansion found a new rhythm. Harrison, now 4, was a bright and energetic little boy, always eager to explore the world around him. Lily, at 3, was his constant shadow, following her big brother on all his adventures. One sunny spring morning, Lila was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard laughter coming from the garden. Through the window, she saw Alexander running after the children, all still in their pajamas, in an impromptu game of catch. "I've got you, princess," Alexander exclaimed, picking Lily up and spinning her around in the air. The little girl squealed with delight, her brown curls swaying in the wind. Harrison jumped up, trying to catch her eye. "Now me, Daddy. Catch me." Lila smiled, her heart overflowing with affection for the scene. It was hard to believe how much their lives had changed in recent years. The mansion, once a place of mourning and loneliness, now echoed with laughter and love. "Breakfast is ready," Lila called from the kitchen door. The children rushed inside, followed by a slightly out-of-breath Alexander Saum, but with a beaming smile on his face. "Good morning," he said, planting a soft kiss on Lila's cheek before sitting down at the table. This gesture of affection, now so natural between them, still made Lila's heart flutter. Over the last few months, her relationship with Alexander had slowly evolved from friendship and mutual respect to something deeper, more intimate. As they served the children, their gazes met across the table, a silent conversation passing between them. There was so much to be said, so many unexpressed feelings, but for now they were content to let things flow naturally. After coffee, Alexander got ready to leave for work. "I have an important meeting today," he said, straightening his tie, "but I promise to be home for dinner." "Good luck," Lila replied, helping him on with his jacket. "We'll be waiting." The children said goodbye with hugs and kisses, and soon Lila found herself alone with them, ready for another day of domestic adventures. The afternoon was drawing to a close when the phone rang. Lila answered it, expecting to hear Alexander's voice telling her he was on his way home. "Mrs. Carson?" An unfamiliar, serious voice sounded on the other end of the line. "This is the Metropolitan Hospital." "There's been an accident." Lila's world seemed to slow down. The words car accident, critical condition, and emergency surgery echoed in her mind as she tried to process the information. With trembling hands, she called Amelia, asking her to come stay with the children. Then she rushed to the hospital, her heart beating frantically in her chest. The hours in hospital seemed to drag on interminably. Lila alternated between pacing nervously down the corridor and sitting still, praying silently. When a doctor finally appeared, his grave expression made Lila's stomach sink. "Mrs. Carson," the doctor asked gently, "Mr. Nash is stable. but still in critical condition. The next 48 hours will be crucial. Lila nodded mechanically, absorbing the information about fractures, bruises, and possible complications. When she finally saw Alexander, her heart almost stopped. He was lying motionless, connected to various monitors and tubes. His eyes, always so lively and expressive, were closed. Lila approached the bed, carefully taking his hand. "Alexander," she whispered, the tears she had held back until then finally falling. "Please stay with us. Harrison and Lily need you. I need you." The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, conversations with doctors, and sleepless nights. Lila was torn between being by Alexander's side and looking after the children, trying to maintain a semblance of normality for Harrison and Lily. A week after the accident, Lila was sitting beside Alexander's bed, quietly reading one of Harrison's favorite books, when she felt a gentle squeeze on her hand. "Olive?" Alexander's voice was hoarse and weak, but to Lila, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. "Alexander!" she exclaimed, tears of relief streaming down her face. "You're awake!" His eyes opened slowly, focusing on her face. "The children?" "They're fine," Lila assured him, gently stroking his cheek. "They're at home with Amelia. We're all waiting for you to come back." A small smile formed on Alexander's lips. "I'm sorry I missed dinner," he murmured. Lila laughed through her tears, the tension of the last few days finally dissipating. "You're forgiven, but just this once." In the days that followed, Alexander's recovery was slow but steady. The children's visits brought light and joy to the hospital room, with Harrison animatedly telling about his days at school and Lily filling her father with colorful drawings. Finally, after 3 weeks, Alexander was able to return home. As she helped him settle into bed, Lila couldn't help noticing how the accident had changed something fundamental between them. "Olive," Alexander called softly, taking her hand. "Those days made me realize something." Lila sat on the edge of the bed, her heart racing. "What?" "Life is too short not to say what we feel," he continued, his eyes fixed on hers. "I love you, Lila. I think I loved you from the first moment I saw you with Harrison. You brought light and love back into my life, into our family." Tears of happiness shone in Lila's eyes. "I love you too, Alexander. More than I can express." They kissed softly, years of unspoken feelings finally finding expression. That night, with the children sleeping peacefully and Alexander recovering beside her, Lila reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her there. From a frightened and pregnant young woman to a fulfilled and loved woman, she had found not just a job, but a home, a family, and a love that defied all odds. As sleep enveloped her, Lila smiled, grateful for every challenge and every joy that had brought her to this perfect moment. The months following Alexander's accident were ones of adaptation and growth for the whole Nash family. Alexander's physical recovery was accompanied by a profound emotional transformation. The workaholic businessman began to reevaluate his priorities, devoting more time to his family and delegating more responsibilities in his company. One sunny summer afternoon, about 6 months after the accident, Alexander surprised Lila with an unexpected request. "Olive," he said, using the affectionate nickname he had adopted for her, "what do you say we take a vacation, just the 4 of us, away from everything?" Lila looked at him in surprise. "A vacation? But what about work and Harrison's school?" Alexander smiled, taking her hands. "Work can wait. And as for school, well, I don't think a few weeks of adventure and learning in the real world will hurt anyone. What do you say?" The enthusiasm in his eyes was infectious, and Lila found herself smiling back. "I think it's a wonderful idea. Where would we go? How about a road trip along the West Coast? We could rent a motorhome, visit national parks, beaches. Let the kids see a bit more of the world." Over the next few weeks, the Nash mansion was filled with the hustle and bustle of preparations. Harrison and Lily could hardly contain their excitement, making endless lists of things they wanted to see and do. Finally, one August morning, the family set off on their adventure. The motorhome, although luxurious, was quite a change from the mansion they were used to, but there was something liberating about leaving formalities behind and living more simply, even if only temporarily. Their first stop was Yosemite National Park. The children were amazed by the gigantic sequoias and the majestic waterfalls. Harrison, always curious, bombarded the guides with questions about the local flora and fauna, while Lily collected treasures, colored pebbles and fallen leaves, which she insisted on keeping as souvenirs. One night, while the children slept exhausted after a day of hiking, Leela and Alexander sat in front of a fire, watching the stars. "You know," Alexander began, his voice soft in the still night, "I never imagined I could be this happy. After losing Claire, I thought my life would just be work and obligations, but you brought the joy back, Olive." Leela snuggled closer to him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You did the same for me, Alex. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't knocked on your door that day." Alexander kissed her softly. "I guess some things are just meant to be." As the trip continued, the family visited the sunny beaches of California, the majestic deserts of Arizona, and the lush forests of Oregon. Each new experience seemed to strengthen their bond even more. It was during a visit to a small coastal village that something unexpected happened. While strolling through a local craft fair, Lila noticed Alexander acting strangely, almost nervously. "Alex, is everything all right?" she asked, concerned. He smiled, although he seemed a little anxious. Yes, just, shall we go for a walk on the beach? The children can stay with Amelia for a moment." Intrigued, Lila agreed. They walked hand in hand along the sand, the sun setting over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Suddenly, Alexander stopped, turning to her. "Olive, these last few years have been the happiest of my life. You've brought love, light and joy not only to me, but to Harrison too, and Lily. She's a blessing who completes our family in a way I never imagined possible." Lila felt her heart racing, sensing what was to come. Alexander knelt on the sand, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. "Lila Carson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, to make official what we already know in our hearts, that we are a family?" Tears of happiness welled up in Lila's eyes. "Yes," she exclaimed, pulling Alexander into a passionate kiss. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring, a delicate solitaire with a diamond surrounded by small sapphires, slid perfectly onto her finger. At that moment, with the sound of the waves in the background and the sunset sky ablaze, Lila felt that her life had finally found its full purpose. When they returned to where the children were, Harrison and Lily ran up to them, eyes shining with excitement. "Did she say yes?" Harrison asked anxiously. Lily was jumping for joy. "Is Mommy Olive going to be our real mommy now?" Lila and Alexander exchanged surprised glances before laughing. Apparently, the proposal hadn't been as well kept a secret as they'd thought. "Yes, my loves," Lila replied, kneeling down to hug the children. "If you want, I'll officially be your mother now." "We already considered you our mother," Harrison said with the wisdom that sometimes surprised a child his age. "Now everyone else will know too." That evening, as the family celebrated with an impromptu picnic on the beach, Lila looked around, her heart overflowing with love. From a scared, pregnant young girl to a bride and mother of 2, almost 3, adorable children, her journey had been unpredictable, challenging and, above all, rewarding. As the stars began to dot the night sky, Lila made a silent promise to herself. Alexander, the children and the baby growing in her womb, a surprise she had yet to share. She promised to love, protect and nurture this family with every fiber of her being, grateful for the second chance life had given her, and determined to make every moment count. Autumn arrived in New York with an explosion of color, the trees of Central Park painting the city in shades of red, orange and gold. At the Nash mansion, wedding preparations were in full swing, mixed with excitement about the arrival of the new baby, the news that Lila had finally shared with the family when they returned from their trip. On a cool October morning, Lila was in the master bedroom, fitting her wedding dress for the last time. The model, elegantly designed to accommodate her 6-month belly, fell softly over her curves. "You look absolutely stunning," said Amelia, who over the years had become more than an assistant. She was a dear friend. Leela smiled, running her hand over the silk of the dress. "Thank you, Amelia, for everything. I don't know how we would have organized all this without you." A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. "Mom, may I come in?" Lily's voice sounded from the other side. "Of course, my love," Leela replied. Lily entered, a little angel in her bridesmaid's dress. Her eyes widened at the sight of Leela. "Wow, Mom, you look like a princess." Leela knelt down, not without some difficulty, to be at the girl's eye level. "And you, my dear, look like an enchanted fairy. Are you ready for the big day?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, but then her expression turned serious. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, what is it?" "After you marry Daddy, will you still be my mummy too?" Leela's heart melted at the innocent question. She took Lily's little hands in hers. "Oh, my love, I'll always be your mummy, always. Marriage only makes official what we already know in our hearts, that we are a family. You, Harrison, the baby that's coming, your father and me, all of us together." Lily smiled, hugging Leela tightly. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, my little one." The ceremony took place in the mansion's garden, transformed into a fairy tale setting with arches of flowers, twinkling lights, and a carpet of petals leading to the altar. Intimate guests, close friends, and some family members occupied the chairs arranged in a semicircle. When the music started, Harrison walked proudly down the aisle, carrying the rings. Lily followed, scattering rose petals with enthusiasm. And then everyone stood up when Leela appeared. Alexander, waiting at the altar, felt his heart skip a beat. Leela was radiant, her dress flowing gracefully, highlighting her natural beauty and the glow of her pregnancy. But more than her appearance, it was the expression of pure happiness on her face that left him breathless. When Leela arrived at the altar, Alexander took her hands, his eyes shining with restrained tears. "You look absolutely beautiful," he whispered. The ceremony was simple and emotional. They exchanged self-written vows, words of love, commitment, and gratitude that made many guests discreetly wipe their eyes. "Leela," Alexander began, his voice laced with emotion, "you came into our lives when we were lost in darkness and brought light, love, and hope. Not only did you look after Harrison as if he were your own, but you taught us how to live and love again. I promise to honor, love, and protect you and our family all the days of my life." Leela, with tears streaming freely down her face, replied, "Alexander, you gave me a home when I needed it most, not just a roof over my head, but a place of love, acceptance, and family. I promise to be by your side in all times, good and bad, and to love you, Harrison, Lily, and our coming baby, with all my heart, all the days of my life." When the celebrant pronounced them man and wife, the explosion of joy was contagious. Harrison and Lily ran to hug their parents, forming a group hug that perfectly symbolized the union of this unique family. The reception that followed was a celebration of love and new life. Between dances, emotional speeches, and lots of laughter, Leela found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her here. While dancing with Alexander, her now husband, Leela felt a strong stirring in her belly. "Oh," she exclaimed, putting her hand to her belly. Alexander looked at her worriedly. "Is everything all right?" Leela smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "Everything's perfect. I think someone wanted to join in the dance too." They laughed together, sharing a moment of intimacy in the midst of the celebration. As the evening progressed, Leela found a moment of stillness, watching the scene before her, Alexander playing with the children, friends and family chatting animatedly, the mansion that had once seemed so cold, now full of life and love. She felt a wave of gratitude so intense that it almost left her breathless. From a frightened, car-pregnant young woman desperate for a job, she had been transformed into a confident, loved and fulfilled woman. Her life had taken a turn that she could never have imagined, but which she could now imagine no other way. As she stroked her belly, feeling the baby's movements, Leela made a silent promise. She would honor this second chance that life had given her by loving and caring for her family with every fiber of her being. And most importantly, she would never stop believing in the power of love to transform lives. Alexander approached her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Nash?" Lila turned in his arms, smiling. "How incredibly blessed I am, and how I can't wait to see what the future holds." They kissed softly, sealing not only their love, but the promise of a future full of joy, challenges, and, above all, unconditional love. And so, waxing under the stars of a fall night in New York, a new stage began for the Nash family. A stage full of promise, hope, and the certainty that, together, they could face whatever life threw at them.